Hello, my name is Kirsty Stonell Walker, and I originally did this talk for the Russell-Cotes Art Gallery and Museum on Valentine's Day in 2021, and it's entitled Paint and Passion, Going to the Heart of Pre-Raphaelite Art. In happier times, we'd all be together in Bournemouth in this magnificent gallery on the East Cliff, which no doubt will be familiar to some of you. This was the home of Merton and Annie Russell-Cotes. Eastcliff Hall was actually built as a present for Annie, and today houses a magnificent art collection, which is not only Merton and Annie's, but paintings that have been purchased since their death. Merton had the beautiful house built, complete with Annie's monogram in the mosaic floor of the old entrance hall, and gave it to her as a gift for her birthday in 1897. Before this date, the couple had been living next door at the Royal Bath Hotel, which they also owned, and which was where a lot of Merton and Annie's art collection had been displayed previously. They toured the world, published memoirs of their travels and lives, and collected a fine art collection, including an interesting collection of art by contemporary women artists, such as Louise Joplin and Evelyn de Morgan. It must be pointed out that the Evelyn de Morgan that Merton bought isn't the one that the Russell-Cotes Art Gallery has today and is very famous for, which is Aurora Triumphans. Merton actually purchased another work by Evelyn de Morgan but sold it, which he seemed to do with a lot of his art collection. He bought it, he toured it in the country, and then he sold it on and bought other art. Anyway, the couple were so devoted to each other that they never spent a wedding anniversary apart. When Annie died in April 1920, Merton died less than a year later, apparently of a broken heart, in January 1921. Within the collection of the Russell-Cotes Art Gallery, there are many images of love and romance. Most famously, there's this lass, Venus Verticordia, the turner of hearts. She personifies all aspects of love that we will be discussing in this talk. She's undoubtedly beautiful. Her face is taken from Alexa Wilding, one of Dante Gabriel Rossetti's favourite models, and as Venus she holds her apple that she was given by Paris, for which he was promised Helen of Troy, and that all worked out very well, I'm sure. In her other hand she holds the arrow of love, which points at her heart. Well, obviously it's pointing at her left boob, but really it's pointing at her heart, and the boob is just a bonus. Around her is a riot of flowers, honeysuckles and roses and fluttery butterflies. But the message of all this loveliness is not all positive. Yes, it's all compelling and almost overwhelming, but it's also temporary. Already the flowers are going over, the honeysuckle has gone into little berries, and the butterflies will flutter away and die. Love is a beautiful, powerful, glorious thing, says the painting, but don't get used to it because it's already over. Well, that's the spirit. The subtitle of this talk is Going to the Heart of Pre-Raphaelite Art because I feel that the Pre-Raphaelites brought us some of the most romantic art images in the world, not that I'm biased. In their paintings you will find images of love, such as this woman coming to free her Jacobite rebel husband from prison. She's carrying a child, she's barefoot and even brought the dog, but she will do anything for the one she loves. There are also images of lust, such as this one by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, of his lover Fanny Cornforth. The painting was seen as scandalous when it was painted, as the title refers to a poem that asserts that a woman is not ruined by her sexuality, but rather it continues to renew her beauty. It was bought by one of Fanny's other admirers, and it was suggested that he would wear the paint away with the amount of times he kissed it. There's no more powerful image of romantic jealousy than Frederick Sandy's Love's Shadow. The girl is actually the artist's common-law wife, Mary Emma Jones, and she's so angry and jealous of her lover that she bites her posy of flowers. The Victorians were always ones for the language of flowers, so this girl holds violets, symbolising love and watchfulness. What's she seen that has made her so cross? And we mustn't forget romantic despair. Pre-Raphaelite art is filled with images of love linked to death, and this painting, Love Locked Out by Annalee Merritt, is a strong example. The figure of love has been locked out by death, the door closing against the still living, and they must wait to be reunited in heaven. Merritt painted this after the death of her husband after just a few months of marriage. Since its exhibition, this painting has also come to have meaning for those people who are unable to be with the ones they love, for other reasons, especially in the later Victorian period and the LGBTQ community. Often the backstories of these works add further passion to the pieces? Does it alter our appreciation of this painting by Edward Burne-Jones of The Beguiling of Merlin, if we know that the young lady playing the wicked Vivian is Maria Zambeco, fellow artist and Burne-Jones's lover? As exciting as Zambeco was, she also seems to have utterly terrified Burne-Jones, as she appears in many of his paintings as an overwhelming presence, such as Phyllis bursting out of a tree at a rather terrified-looking Demophon. As happy reunions go, this does not seem to be joyous, but rather more startling. I don't think we're in any doubt, with the depths of the sea, exactly how scary Burne-Jones found the power of desire. You can get carried away with love, it's true, but it can wreck a good many things. This mermaid looks utterly delighted that she's found a handsome young man to haul off to her watery home, but she doesn't seem to have noticed that he's drowned. The problem with being in love, Burne-Jones seems to be saying here, is that you don't know how the other person feels, whether your love is equal to theirs, and exactly how long they can hold their breath. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's begin with the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and their famously tangled love lives. As you all know, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was formed by these three chaps: John Everett Millais, Dante Gabriel Rossetti and William Holman Hunt. They wanted to revolutionise painting in both technique and subject. Here we see all three as older, established painters. But they were young, ambitious boys when they formed their brotherhood in 1848, and obviously spent a long time thinking about women, not just for their art. I like to think of these three photographs as the evolution of the beard, from no beard to some beard to full beard. Anyway, starting with Millais. He made his romantic mark in art by falling in love with the wife of his main patron and supporter, John Ruskin. Effie was married to Ruskin the same year as the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was formed in 1848, but the marriage remained unconsummated for reasons that have been endlessly speculated about. In 1853, Ruskin decided it would be a jolly good idea to take his wife and the young handsome Millais off to Scotland for an intimate holiday/work trip. Well, the upshot was that Ruskin got a very fine portrait of himself by a waterfall, and Effie and Millais fell in love. Effie left her husband, ignored the scandal and married Millais, and lived happily ever after with their many, many children. William Holman Hunt had an equally complex love life. He decided that he wanted to find a poor but honest working girl and educate her My Fair Lady style. The girl he found was Annie Miller, a barmaid in the pub next door to his studio in Chelsea, and she is described as being filthy and lice-ridden when he first saw her. How romantic! He whisked her away to be scrubbed and taught to speak proper, while she modelled for paintings such as Il Dolce Far Niente and The Awakening Conscience. Here we see a kept woman having a moment of revelation on the lap of her rich boyfriend. He is merrily singing away, but the woman has got up. She hasn't heard an ice cream van go by. Hunt actually intended the painting to be displayed as a pair with this one. That's better. Love can be perilous to the souls, the Victorians believed. Jesus is keeping an eye on you, and if you choose a married man to be your lover, let him keep you in a very nice house in St John's Wood with your own piano, then he's coming round to have a word. Originally, the girl had a look of utter horror on her face because Jesus was coming round to tell her she was damned for her romantic choices. But Hunt repainted her expression to be one of salvation. She is renouncing her piano-playing lover boy and turning her heart to Jesus. Hunt actually went off to the Holy Lands for a while, leaving instructions for Annie's education and a list of approved artists that she was allowed to pose for, which included Millais and George Price Boyce, but definitely not Rossetti. But Annie apparently was not a lass who could be told what to do, and when Hunt returned he found that she had posed for his best friend Rossetti. It's never a good idea to be alone with Rossetti, apparently. The reason this was a problem was that Hunt did not actually trust his fellow Pre-Raphaelite brother as far as he could throw him. Having sat for Rossetti behind Hunt's back, Annie was told to sling a hook, the hussy. That's why, even though books still say these paintings are of Annie, they were actually repainted by Hunt to be the face of his wife Fanny Waugh. He scraped Annie's face out of his work so thoroughly that even with X-ray there's no trace of her left. We have to rely on the work of Rossetti and Millais to show us what she actually looked like, if you will, unscraped. The love life of Dante Gabriel Rossetti is famously complex, or as I like to say, jaunty. Not satisfied with stuffing up his friends' romances, he did a pretty good job of messing his own up too. Just as an aside, I really love this photograph of him with John Ruskin. They are holding on to each other with all the stoic grimness of a long married couple. How romantic. Rossetti famously loved and tormented fellow poet and artist Elizabeth Siddal, probably still most famous for her rendition of Ophelia in Millet's painting. Rossetti fell in love with her, obsessively drawing her while she tried to get art lessons out of him. Good luck with that. Much like the butterflies in Venus Verticordia, Rossetti's attention was never one to settle on just one face, and his romances included not just Annie Miller, but also Fanny Cornforth and Jane Morris, the wife of his best friend, William Morris. Again, it's never wise to be friends with Rossetti. As you can see from this image, Rossetti wasn't exactly subtle when it came to other women. It must have been a little distressing to Elizabeth to know that her husband was in the next room painting Fanny Cornforth as Rosamond Clifford, a famous mistress awaiting her royal lover. I'm not sure it would have been any comfort to Elizabeth, but actually in the story of Fair Rosamond Clifford, Queen Eleanor finds out about her husband's mistress and sneaks in and bumps her off, as in this rather lovely painting by Evelyn de Morgan. De Morgan, incidentally, had a lovely marriage and very much loved her husband, the novelist and ceramicist William de Morgan. Apparently he fell in love with her when he saw her at a fancy dress party dressed as a tube of paint, which is absolutely delightful and undoubtedly the nicest thing you're going to hear in this talk. Going back to Rossetti, even in death Rossetti could not leave Elizabeth alone. She was the epitome of love, the Beatrice to his Dante, as in this painting of the moment of Beatrice's death, Beata Beatrix, painted obsessively after Elizabeth's death. It wasn't that Rossetti wasn't loved, or didn't love again, but the death of Elizabeth Siddal in 1862 began a slow decline for Rossetti that wrecked his health until his own death in 1882. In the last 20 years of his life, Rossetti painted mournful images of love, an example of which is the Blessed Damozel, looking over her bower in heaven, down at her lover still on earth. His obsession with Jane Morris, which shadowed his final years, brought more dark and punishing figures of women, there to remind him that love was not kind to him, just as possibly he had been unkind to others. For goodness sake, this isn't very jolly and romantic at all. Surely there has to be some happier images of romance in Pre-Raphaelite art. I'm tempted to turn to another of the Rossetti family, because when John Brett fell in love with Christina Rossetti, the poet sister of Dante Gabriel Rossetti, he painted this beautiful, if unfinished, portrait of her. I'm not entirely sure what he intended to paint behind her. It almost looks like she's crowned by it, but I love the huge quill next to her, in case we're in any doubt that she was a writer. Brett was absolutely smitten with Christina and even proposed. However, Christina did not feel the same way, and even went as far as to write a poem entitled "No Thank You, John," just in case Brett didn't get the message. It contains the line, "I'd rather say no to 50 Johns than answer yes to you." It looks as if we have to look outside the Pre-Raphaelite inner circle for happy love. Arthur Hughes had a long and happy marriage to his beautiful wife Tryphena, and used her as a model in many of his early pieces, including The Long Engagement, which shows a curate and his fiancée looking at her carved name on a tree. It's been there a while and reflects the fact that the couple are too poor to marry as quickly as they'd like, but a glossy spaniel in the picture shows the couple's loyalty for each other and that they will marry in time, I'm sure. John Rodham Spencer Stanhope gave us this delightful image of love bothering a young lady while she's out with some mates, but the interruption does not seem to be unwelcome. It doesn't hurt that Cupid is a rather lovely looking figure, and I have to say that anyone with wings that big should really be careful around trees. How exactly is he going to manage to untangle himself and shoot his bow and arrow? It's a bit of a mystery, but luckily for Cupid, the young lady does not look like she's in a hurry to move. Better known for his political views and wallpaper designs, William Morris also painted, although briefly, but he managed to produce this rather beautifully awkward image of the woman he'd fallen in love with, Jane Burden. We'll gloss over the fact that he painted his future wife as an adulteress, rather foreshadowing her own affairs with Rossetti and Wilfrid Scowen Blunt. It's better to concentrate on the story that he allegedly wrote, "I cannot paint you, but I love you," on the canvas as a shy proposal. Actually, William Morris and his beloved Jane get to star in the most romantic image for our time from Rossetti, because not only are they St George and Princess Sabra, and they're in love, but he's washing his hands. Romance and good hygiene should quite literally go hand in hand. Also, they're staying indoors, which is very sensible. I know he went out to kill a dragon, but I think you could argue that was an essential work-related trip, and now the happy couple are in their own romantic bubble. Medievalism doesn't do a bad job of providing romance, so I think William Morris was onto something. The Pre-Raphaelites and their followers seem to have adored a bit of medieval romance, with images such as this one by Elizabeth Siddal of a knight and his lady. He's off to do a bit of jousting or whatever, and she's tied a pennant to his spear. The idea of knights and their ladies, of handsome men in shiny armour and women they're willing to die for, really appealed to the romantic young Victorian artists. For artists like Siddal, I think that love beset with complications, which is often the case in medieval romance, struck a very personal note. The knights in images of courtly love are often shown leaving, but the women that are left with the certainty that they're off doing good and being noble. I'm not sure Elizabeth could ever hold fast to that conviction with Rossetti, but the imagery might have helped. Generally, though, without too much backstory, medievalism provides the Victorians with a backdrop of romance, and the period is filled with men in tights being unspeakably romantic to ladies, often while armed. I always think swords tend to get in the way, like in this image by Patton. He has to make sure he's not about to kneel on that sword, which would have put a very definite and abrupt end to any courtship. It does raise the question of what exactly you're meant to do with a sword while romancing a lady. Arthur Hughes's courtly gentleman is trying to be all romantic while brandishing a blade, which the lady is looking at somewhat dubiously. I bet she regrets the volume of her sleeves now, as they're unlikely to survive the date unscathed. A more straightforwardly heartwarming story of love is the Eve of St Agnes, a poem by John Keats about Madeline and Porphyro, a love-struck young couple who run off together away from her awful drunken family. In the poem, Madeline follows the love rituals for St Agnes's Eve, which is the 20th of January, in order to see a vision of her future lover. This works very well indeed, as when she wakes up, the rather dashing Porphyro is waiting to elope with her, which is a bit of a result. Actually, the Victorians loved a bit of superstition that involved romance. Millais did this tiny gem of a picture about a bridesmaid pushing wedding cake through a ring 9 times in order to see a vision of her true love. I now realise where I went wrong. Cake does not last long enough with me to be pushed through a ring 9 times. And look at this happy couple, aren't they lovely? Unfortunately, they're Paolo and Francesca, epic legendary lovers who ruin romance for everyone, because although we start with images like this by Rossetti, we end up like this, after her husband, who is also Paolo's brother, catches them snogging and stabs the pair of them, for goodness sake. The story doesn't end there either, because the couple are next seen in Dante's Divine Comedy, swirling around the second circle of hell, which is reserved for the lustful. There are quite a few paintings of Dante viewing the couple dubiously, as they still can't keep their hands off each other, some people. However, this is sadly true of paintings of love for the Pre-Raphaelites. An awful lot of them involve death. As we've already mentioned, Rossetti and Elizabeth Siddal lived out their art, and poor Elizabeth died young. As if to foreshadow the tragedy, Rossetti painted the love of his life as the dead Beatrice in Dante's Dream. I think it was intended to be a grand romantic gesture when it was painted, but after Elizabeth's own death, these images just seem morbid and horribly coincidental. Incidentally, when Rossetti fell in love with Jane Morris after Elizabeth's death, he repainted the whole scene, replacing Elizabeth with Jane, because he's classy. Mind you, he's not alone in loving a bit of love and death scenery, and there's a rich tradition of tragic love in the subjects that define Pre-Raphaelite art. Both Millais and Hunt went for the story of Lorenzo and Isabella, who fell in love. As we can see in Millais' painting, the two lovers bond over an orange, which is lovely, but all is not well in the scene. Isabella's family were not best pleased with the couple, as you can see by Isabella's brother there kicking towards the dog. And they murdered Lorenzo, which is a bit of an overreaction, but that's families for you. When Isabella found out, she put her lover's head in a pot of basil, as you do. That's not a tip you normally hear on Gardener's Question Time, but I bet that grew lovely. As a side note, one of the most famous and beautiful romantic poems from this period is of a similar story. Meeting on the Turret Stair by Frederick William Burton is from the tragic tale of Hellalil and Hillebrand. They were lovers, but her family did not approve, and violence ensued. Mercifully, the painting inspired by the tale is a moment of love rather than one of stabby misery. And don't get me started on the poor Lady of Shalott, who, after being shut up in a tower for some unspecified reason, had to make do with only looking at everyday life through a mirror, including seeing other people fall in love, while she just gets to sit round and do her tapestry. But then disaster strikes, and Sir Lancelot rides by and his thighs are so shiny that she has to have a proper look at them. I'm not joking, that is actually what happens in the poem, and quite honestly, which of us can say they haven't been led astray by some shiny thighs? Anyway, the curse comes upon her and she has to get in a boat and die. Well, that's a bit harsh, isn't it? I'm not sure what it says about me, but actually the paintings of romantic subjects that I really like are the ones where it all goes horribly wrong. In these paintings, it's all about how awful love is, and yet how we can't help ourselves. Most famously, Arthur Hughes gave us April Love, a scene where a girl and her lover have argued, and she turns away in misery. The boy is kissing the hand of his lover after the argument, obviously thinking they'll make up, but the girl is looking meaningfully at some fallen petals, because for her it is all over. Actually, this painting reminds me of a couple we once saw on the saluting platform in Old Portsmouth. They'd had a hell of a row, but the young man was very concerned that he'll still get to do kissing and whatnot, whereas the young lady was definitely of another opinion. Perilous romances also occur in the countryside, with this painting from William Holman Hunt entitled The Hireling Shepherd. On the face of it, we have a lusty young farmer trying to impress a woman with a moth. It is true that women love moths. However, in the background, we can see a suicidal sheep gorging themselves to death in the corn. Now, it might just be me, but exploding sheep tend to put a bit of a dampener on romance. The girl is right not to be impressed by that moth. It also is The Stages of Cruelty by Ford Madox Brown, where a woman is being heartless towards a besotted man. Next to her, a girl is hitting a dog. Incidentally, she's using a sprig of the plant Love Lies Bleeding. The inference is the cruel girl will grow into the heartless woman, no longer content with mildly irritating bloodhounds, but enjoying tormenting her lovers like Estella in Dickens's Great Expectations. But it's not just women who are feckless and cruel. Look at this poor lass clutching her sixpence behind a garden wall because she's just found out that her lover is off messing with somebody else. Or possibly a bone's just gone in her corset. It's really hard to tell, but either way, it's a painful situation all round. And that's not to say that women are not merrily doing each other over, probably over a man. Take this lesser-known painting from the Russell-Cotes collection. Frank Cadogan Cowpen was a later Pre-Raphaelite painter who continued to paint in that style until his death in the 1950s, long after it was fashionable. I personally love this painting because of the sneaky brunette, no doubt the dark lady whom blondies should beware, as the fortune teller warns her. She looks well shifty. Women really cannot be trusted. That feeds nicely into paintings based around La Belle dans son Merci, another poem by Keats about how a young knight finds himself tormented after falling in love with a bewitching woman. He's out doing his nightly stuff when he comes across her in a meadow. In Waterhouse's vision of the scene, the girl has managed to lasso him with her hair and he can't resist her. Look at the little heart on her sleeve. Surely she must be trustworthy. Dixie chose the moment the knight is thunderstruck by love after lifting this mysterious, beautiful fairy girl up onto his horse before going with her to her elven grot, which just sounds lovely. The morning after, he wakes up on a field filled with regrets, unable to take his mind off this temptress who has used him and cast him aside. Poor chap. Mind you, just waking up with the regrets is a lucky escape if you consider the fate of young Hylas here. He stopped off on his journey to find the golden fleece with the Argonauts in search of a drink of water. Instead, he found a pond full of very attractive young ladies and was mysteriously never seen again. I like to play a game with my Pre-Raphaelite friends, which is Which Nymph Are You? I quite fancy being second from the right. I like to think her name is Doris. I think the idea is that they lured him away to have their wicked way with him, the poor soul. Actually, I think they ate him. I have to tell you that in the 1970s, the bath foam company Ondine used Hylas and the Nymphs in their adverts and even made a record. Music to Bathe By in 1975. I would buy this bubble bath in a heartbeat, and I actually own a copy of the album, although I've not yet managed to drag a record player into the bathroom yet. The idea that women are temptresses who are there to make men feel powerless is very interesting. I think it says more about men's fears than the power of beautiful women, especially during the Victorian period. Falling in love for a woman is always far more risky in many ways, and could lead to despair and destitution rather than rosy romance. Being led astray by a rich young man would lead to a ruin for a young woman. You can tell that this red-coated young scoundrel will cause nothing but trouble for the woodsman's daughter. It'll all end in tears. Do not take his strawberries. In case you're in any doubt, Spencer Stanhope gave us the whole story of the girl's seduction in 2 canvases. Starting with Robin of Modern Times, we see a girl who looks worryingly young, asleep in a meadow. All very innocent, but when followed by thoughts of the past, we see what's happened to her. What has started as an innocent roll in the hay has ended up with her working as a prostitute in a grim room next to the Thames. A bit like the awakening conscience, the girl in Thoughts of the Past is supposed to be reacting to the other canvas. In this case, her memory of the moment that set her down the sad path she's now on. In Augustus Egg's Past and Present, we see the descent of a woman who is in quite a bit of trouble, and the inference is that she has had an affair outside the home, and her husband will throw her out. In the first canvas, we are shown literally the fallen woman grovelling before her horrified husband, while the daughter's house of cards tumbles meaningfully in the background. In the later canvases, Prayer and Despair, the daughters, now completely orphaned, judging by the elder daughter's black dress, look out at a moon, which their mother also looks at while starving under a bridge, which is obviously all she deserves, the hussy. It's interesting that the daughters have been left without either parent, and I think the inference is that the shame and shock of the mother's infidelity kills her husband, so she commits further sin of leaving her children, both girls, and therefore all the more vulnerable, to pray for their own safety in such a harsh world. The mother sheltering under the bridge actually has a baby under her shawl, is tiny feet poking out. Women's sexual indiscretion in the Victorian period is often seen as affecting the lives of her children, especially daughters. A boy could rebuild his reputation by hard work or even joining the army and rising in society that way. Girls were left at the mercy of life, and love was an extremely risky business. Obviously, no man needs fear this sort of shame. The closest we ever get to it in art of this period is William Holman Hunt's The Awakening Conscience, and I don't think our piano-playing lover boy is that concerned about the fiery pits of hell starving under a bridge. Sometimes you don't know you've found the right person until it's all too late. In Rossetti's image of an unhappy reunion, Found, the farmer's boy is holding the hands of his former lover, but she is having none of it. The hussy cleared off to London and became a good-time girl, and had a far better time of it, to be honest. However, meeting up with her former beloved has filled her with shame, and she falls to her knees because she is a fallen woman, and realises that she is damned because of her naughty conduct. Like the calf on the cart, she is caught in a net, but it's a net of sin from which there is no escape. As if to hammer home the point, Rossetti intended to paint tombstones above her behind a wall, as if to say she would be barred from a nice Christian burial, or have to go and wallow in her pit of sin forever. Well, as Rossetti was one who enjoyed a bit of a wallow in sin himself, his heart was never really in this picture, and it remained unfinished. I actually think another artist did the scene more justice. Almost half a century after Rossetti started Found, George Harcourt painted Forgiven. In Harcourt's reimagining of the scene, the girl swoons with delight at being home with her handsome farmer, and the pair are happily reunited. She wears a very similar flowery frock to the woman in the previous painting. There's also similarity with Rossetti's Beata Beatrix, but this is a joyful picture of togetherness and understanding and forgiveness. Anyway, I don't want to end my talk on love with such appalling examples of bad love and damnation, so I'll finish with a painting which appears to be terrible, but I think can be read in a hopeful way. So this is Love Betrayed by Spencer Stanhope. Not a promising title, but bear with me. It's a scene of blindfolded Cupid stumbling around while a young maiden watches impervious. She does not care that the figure of love is about to plunge through a rickety bridge, and in fact could be said to have lured him to his doom, but the past year has made me consider this painting slightly differently. Like the maiden, we're all rather confined to our homes, cut off from those we love and from love itself, and the longer we're inside, the more strange and fantastical it seems that we ever crossed our bridges and got to be together. However, love has wings, the sneaky little devil. Even though our bridges get a bit holy, it will reach us because it will fly across the difficulties and all will be well, I promise. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to my talk, and I hope you enjoyed it.